Om Ganatimirandasyanganangana Sadakya Chaksuran Militam Yana Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanyamanovistam Stapitam Yana Buddhare Sayamrapakaramayam Darati Swaparantikam Bandeham Sri Guru Siyata Parakamaram Sri Gurun Vaishnavam Sya Sri Rupam Sagadatam Sahagana Raganatam Vitam Stam Sajevam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shrivishikan Vitam Sja Nama Om Vishnu Paraya Krishna Pastaya Bhuttade Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Tinam Namaniste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pachaline Nirvishesa Sanyavadi Pasketa Desana Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhakta Vindam Narayanam Namaskritam Naram Chayavanarottamam Devam Sarasatim Vyasam Tito Jayodiret Neshta Priyeshu and Bhadresu Nityam Bhagavati Yatama Shukhi Bhakti Bhavati Naistiki Nigama Kalpaduragaritam Param Shukamakaramitas Samitam Pivata Bhagatam Rashamaraya Mahora Hora Shikabhavai Bhavakaham Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare. Thanks to Bhai Bhavi from on the other side of this wall for joining me and starting off everything with all kinds of thumbs up and emojis. We're off with a bang. Anjali, Hare Krishna, welcome to WW Wisdom Wednesday. Mary and Patrick from Reno. Let's see who else. Joe, Terry, and Taruni from Minnesota. Yeah, those are the ones that have joined us so far. Thank you. This is Wisdom Wednesday. This is going to round out our week. And it's a very stimulating verse that we have this morning. It's the 32nd verse in the 3rd chapter, the 1st canto, Srimad Bhagavatam, the beautiful story of the Absolute Truth. Without any further ado, let's dive into the nectar, shall we? Ata param yad abhyaktam ayudha guna brimhitam adrishta shruta vashtutpat sajivo yat punar bhavaha. Beyond this gross conception of form is another subtle conception of form, which is without formal shape and is unseen, unheard, and unmanifest. The living being has his form beyond this subtlety, otherwise he could not have repeated verse. So how are we going to spend half an hour this morning, 35, 40 minutes talking about something which is as subtle as what's being described here? Well, the only way we can do that is certainly not through our own experience or sensory experimentation or research, but we're receiving the knowledge from above. It's called Sabda Brahma. It's a transcendental source of knowledge which has its origin beyond the limits of our senses and our mind and our intelligence. Krishna is speaking in the Bhagavad Gita, the song of God, to his most intimate friend and devotee. They are eternal companions. They incarnate together as Nara and Narayan, life after life after life after life. So there are many scriptures, and there's a lot of knowledge in those scriptures. A lot of knowledge goes beyond what we can directly perceive with our senses, but there is no level or quality of knowledge which can come close to what is delivered in the Bhagavad Gita. Remember, this is God speaking. How many other scriptures do you know of where God is speaking personally the better part of 700 verses? I mean, I was brought up in Judeo-Christianity, and the only thing I read was that he spoke a sentence through a pillar and a sentence through a cloud, and then he gave the 10 commandments, and that's pretty much it. Not that there's not a lot about God from saints and sages, but the words from God's mouth are just as many as you can count on the fingers of two hands. However, in the Bhagavad Gita, which is 700 verses, at least 650 of those verses are spoken not only directly from the mouth of the Supreme Personality of God. And remember, this isn't Vishnu or this isn't Shiva. This isn't a portion or a plenary portion or a portion of a portion of a portion. This is coming from Param Brahma, Param Dhamma, Povitam, Paramam Divyam, the original omnipotent, omniscient source of all the different avatars and incarnations. And as if that wasn't compelling enough, he's speaking to his best friend. So if you have a friend, you know what I'm talking about, isn't it? You will reveal in that intimacy of friendship things that you never reveal to casual acquaintances or distant relatives. And so Krishna is giving Guyatamam, Sarva Guyatamam Paramam Vacham. He's giving the most confidential knowledge. He's speaking the most intimate words to Arjuna. And hey, aren't we lucky? Aren't we lucky that we get to listen in on that conversation that took place between the Lord and his eternal friend 5,000 years ago? So some of the vast body of knowledge which is delivered to us, to which we have no access through empiricism, research and development with our senses, is from the 7th chapter, 4th verse of the Bhagavad Gita, in which Krishna says to Arjuna, Bhumir apo narovairu kama narabhuvaye ahankara itiyame bina prakritim ashtara. He describes the external energy. The Lord is describing his own external energy. It's eightfold. 5 gross and 3 subtle elements. Earth, air, fire, water, mind, sky, mind, intelligence, and false ego. So these are the 5 gross elements. Now, I want you to think about something. Earth, air, fire, earth, water, fire, air, and false ego. These are the gross material elements. Now, which ones can you actually perceive? Of these 5 gross elements, how many can we perceive with our mundane senses? We can perceive earth, certainly. We can perceive fire, certainly. We can perceive water, certainly. But that's it. We can't see, at least we can't perceive visually air, and then akash, sky, we can't perceive. We can perceive it through sky carries sound vibration, so we can perceive it indirectly. I mean, we know air is there because we feel it, but we can't see it. And we know sky is there because we hear things, but we can't see it. So what we can see of the gross elements is only earth, water, and air. And people fire. And people say, if there's a God, show him to me. If there's a God, show him to me. How are you going to see him, even if he appears? Actually, he's always in front of us. He's in our heart. He's everywhere present through the super soul. So the question is not whether God can show himself to you. In one form or another, he's showing himself to us all the time. But the problem is we can't see him because our senses are so dull and so limited. Even the 5 gross elements, we can only see 3 of them. Now, there's 3 more material elements, which are the subtle material elements, which are mind, intelligence, false ego. We certainly can't see mind, we can't see intelligence, we can't see false ego. So talk about going from gross to subtle. After we get through fire, we're finished. We're finished. That's as far as we can go. It's like, of the 8 elements, the visual, the ones that become perceived by us visually are only 3. And then Krishna says, aparayam. In the next verse, 5th verse of the 7th chapter, Krishna tells Arjuna, aparayam, above these 8-fold material elements, itas tu anyam, there is another element, prakriti vidi me param, which is superior to earth, air, fire, water, sky, intelligence, and false ego. Jiva bhuta mahabaho, it is the spiritual sparks, the jiva atmas, spiritual souls, which emanate from the body of the Lord, who enter into these 8-fold material elements, and according to the karma of their past lives, assume forms, embodiments within the 8,400,000 species of life. And as soon as the living entities, through the glance of the Lord, enter into and permeate matter, the whole thing comes to life. So it is the Jiva Bhuta Mahabaho, it is the particles of God, the spiritual sparks emanating from God, who maintain and support the entire cosmic manifestation. And it is that soul who, after having finished one body, and then again accruing karma, attachments, appetites, desires, ambitions, again, that consciousness takes one to another body at the time of death. And Prabhupada asks the question, if if everything can be explained only in terms of the eightfold material elements, if that was all there is, that was the whole show, the whole ball of wax, as many materialistic scientists would have us believe, they would believe that the soul is imagination, make-believe, phantasmagoria. So the question is, then why would the Bhagavad Gita, why would the Supreme Lord be talking about the reincarnation or the change of body of the Jivatma, of the soul? If we were only the five gross elements and the three subtle elements, if that's what we were, if that's what constituted ourselves, our identity, our individuality, then at the time of death, it should all just go poof, and that would be all she wrote. The air within us would merge with the totality of air. The fire within us would merge with the totality of fire. The earth within us would go back to the totality of earth. Earth to earth, dust to dust, ash to ashes. The ego would merge with the ego. The mind would merge with the universal mind, isn't it? But that is not what happens. Every one of us is conscious of our own individual existence. We are conscious that we existed in the past. We are conscious that we exist in the present, isn't it? And it's inconceivable that at any time in the future we will cease to exist. The reason that we cannot conceive of ourselves not existing is because we are eternal. You cannot conceive of something which is not. So the fact that we are eternal causes our perception to be comfortable in thinking of ourselves as ever existing. And in fact, Krishna confirms this in the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. I think it's the 20th verse. Nato evaham jatunasham, natvam nema janavapaha, natchaiva sabhavishari, sarvavayam ata param. Never was there a time, Krishna tells Arjuna, when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be. So the fact that the soul is more subtle yet than the eightfold material elements does not mean that the soul does not exist. It exists. In fact, it is the cause that we're walking upright, the cause that we're breathing, the cause that we're moving, the cause that we're thinking, and the cause that we have a sense of self, a sense of identity. And at the time of death, because that spiritual spark has gone away, it does not mean that he didn't exist. He's unseen, he's unheard, and yet at the same time, as soon as that divine spark of God leaves the body at the time of death, do we not say, looking at the corpse lying there in repose in the coffin, do we not say upon contemplation of the corpse, what? Tell me. Go ahead and put it in your comments. What do we say? What do we say at the wake, at the funeral? What do we say if we've just happened upon somebody right after the accident, or right when they've unplugged them from the life-sustaining machines? What do we say? Or at least what do we think? He or she is gone, isn't it? So that it's subtle, that it's unseen, does not mean that it does not exist. And we get authoritative information about the existence of the soul from the Supreme Soul, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. Now, where does the soul go? That also indicates the presence not only of the soul, the spirit, our spiritual essence, but the fact that according to our karma and our desires and our deserts, everything is calculated. Every choice we've made in this present life, just as the choices that we made in our past lives resulted in our current birth and circumstances, similarly, our choices in this life are going to result in our future birth and circumstances. So how all that is calculated and how that is disposed and dispensed indicates that aside from the eightfold material elements and aside from the Jivatma, which pervades and supports and maintains those elements, there is another element, which is etad jonini bhutini sarvanitya aham krishnasya jagara prabhavas pralayas tata. I believe that's the 6th verse in the 7th chapter, which indicates that besides the individual souls, there is the Supreme Soul, who is the maintainer and supporter of all the other souls, and by whose arrangement the dispensation and placement is made from one life to another based on one's karma. In the Bhagavad Gita, still 2nd chapter, Vasamsi Jirnani Yatavahaya Nirvani Grinati Naroparani Tatasirani Vihayajananti Anyati Samyati Devani Dehi. Krishna again tells Arjuna this intimate knowledge. As a person puts on new garments, giving up the old ones, the soul similarly accepts new material bodies, giving up the old and useless ones. The phenomena of life, the phenomena of consciousness, the phenomena of willpower is not explained simply on the basis of the 5 gross elements, the 3 subtle material elements, nor is it even explained in terms of the individual spirit soul. According to this verse, the body is like clothes. Now we have the gross body, which you could compare to the overcoat. Now it's almost October here in Utah, and usually we get a snow in October, nothing very serious. It stays for a day or two. We don't really get, usually the last few years, the snow comes on Christmas Day, and up until at least Thanksgiving is quite nice. But after that, we're going to have to start bundling up in our overcoats. We're going to be more bulky, more awkward, more unwieldy as the weather gets colder. So the earth, air, fire, water, and sky is like your overcoat, isn't it? And then under the overcoat, we're going to have something lighter. And that is compared to earth, mind, intelligence, false ego. So the 5 gross elements are like your overcoat. The 3 subtle elements, the mental and psychic elements, are compared to your shirt. But then inside, there is the living being. And the fact that that soul, as microscopic as it may be, a couple of sessions ago we quoted the verse Keshaga Satigabhaga Panasitam Satada Shamashuk Jiva Shurupari. The soul is 1/10,000th the size of a tip of a hair. So tiny, and yet because it's coming from none other than the omnipotent Lord, that tiny soul powers our body throughout the entirety of our life of 60, 70, 80, 90, or 100 years. So that soul is so powerful that it drives, and it is not destroyed at the time of death. Rather, it uses up, it wears out this material body. And what its situation is in the next life, that is all arranged by material nature. And when we ever talk about nature, we have to ask the question, whose nature? That is Krishna's nature. Maya dakshana prakriti suyate hetanananikat jagadviparite. So we go from one body to another caused by our karma, which is generated from the choices that we make from one life to another. And all that is computed and calculated by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the cause of all causes. He tu nanena kanteya jagadvipari vartate. Each one of us, at the time of death, we have composed a certain mentality based on our choices and our preferences and our likes and our dislikes during this lifetime. And that is called Shmaran. In the 6th verse of the 8th chapter, Prashant, of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna tells his friend and eternal associate Arjuna, Yam yam vapi shmaran bhava tyajiti ante kalevaram tam tam avaiti kanteya shadat bhava bhavita. Whatever consciousness one has at the time of leaving one's body, ante kalevaram, at the last moment, tantan evaiti kanteya shadat bhava. Bhava means state of being. Whatever your consciousness is at the time of leaving your body, that will be your state of being in your next life. Shmaran, whatever the impression is that you have in your mind. And that impression will be a composite of all the different choices that you've made, all the different desires that you've satisfied and pursued during this life. It is said by Srila Prabhupada that a person who quits his body thinking of Krishna attains the transcendental nature of the Supreme Lord himself. But it is not true that a person who thinks of something other than Krishna attains the same transcendental state. So often, at the departure of a friend or acquaintance or even loved one, we say, oh, it's gone to heaven. Out of sentiment, we say, oh, now they've gone to heaven. But that's contradicted by this statement of Prabhupada. If you think of Krishna or God, you will go to God. But if you think of something other than God, you will not go to God. So someone might say, well, I can live whatever kind of life I want, and then at the end of life, I can pull it all together and think of God. Nuh-uh, doesn't work that way. You're going to think of the things that have pushed your buttons, the things that your heart has gone pitter-patter about, the things that you've thrilled about. It might have been politics, it might have been gossip, it might have been technology, it might have been making money, it might have been bowling, it might have been marathoning, it might have been eating certain foods, it might have been your family, it might have been your patriotism or your political party. Whatever got you going, whatever you got excited about, that's going to determine your state in the next life. We talked the other day about the bolt worm, a little worm that lives inside of a tree trunk. And there's a wasp that comes, takes that worm for its food. So the wasp is inserting itself into the hole of the worm, getting closer and closer and closer. And the wasp is going to eat that little bolt worm. So the worm is looking at the wasp at the moment of its death and resenting and hating that wasp because it's going to cut short its sense gratification. And guess what? That worm becomes the very same species of wasp in its next life. So this is called Shmarana. It means, on one level, remembering, but more than that, it's the impression. It's the indelible impression which is on one's mind, and particularly at the time of death. Remembrance of Krishna is, read my lips, not possible for the impure soul who has not diligently practiced Krishna consciousness in LDS, loving devotional service. Or as Mahavishnu said in his 1960 album, love, what is it? Love, devotion, and surrender. Therefore, you should practice. So you'll pass the test and be able to think of Krishna at the time of death and be free of conditioned life. Imagine being free of birth, death, disease, and old age. Wouldn't it be a great investment in this short human form of life to make choices and to cultivate a practice in such a way, the result of which would be that next life, upon leaving this body, you didn't take another body, but you assumed your original state of immortality in the service of the Lord. And failing to do that, I think there's no greater tragedy than missing the opportunity of this human form of life to go back to home, back to Godhead. Otherwise, you're going to be tossed and turned in the ocean of impressions, smarnams in this material world. There are 8,400,000 species of life, which each one of which corresponds to a shmaranam, to an impression that the living being had at the end of his last life, and that resulted in his current incarnation. And the impressions that you're cultivating now are dooming you, condemning you to take another body after leaving this current body. There's an example that I think is appropriate in this connection. I've heard that when you kill a snake, the snake takes a snapshot of you in its eye at the time of death. And so the mate of the snake comes along a little later and looks in the eyes of the mate, and they see the image of the person that killed them. And so they're always on the watch that if that person ever comes in that area again, they'll know, this person murdered my mate, and they'll do everything they can to bite them. So that snapshot that the snake takes at the time of death, that is also called shmaran, and it is an impression that lasts after the death, after the demise of the body. And Prabhupada says What to speak of the spiritual world, which is full of eternally liberated living beings whose bodies are not perishable, who are not made of mucus, bile, and stool, whose bodies are made of original, blissful, sublime spiritual essence. Even this material world exhibits amazing, wonderful workmanship. Material nature creates varieties of bodies to accommodate the living beings according to their propensities for sense gratification. In other words, shmaranam. Imagine a living being who wants to taste stool is given a material body that is quite suitable for eating stool, that of a hog. If you ever look at a hog right after it's eating stool, it's got a big, there are many hogs in Vrindavan and they're open sewers. So you'll always see hogs dining at the open sewers. And if they happen to turn away from what they're eating and look at you, they will express their satisfaction with a grin from ear to ear. Yes, hogs actually do grin, and they grin most often when they're getting their favorite type of food, which is stool. They've been given such a birth, such a body, that their taste buds resonate when there's stool slipping across the tongue. Enough of that on this Wednesday morning. But also, in terms of dietary preferences, someone who goes into a restaurant and they want their steak medium rare or rare, they want to see it red, they want to see the blood on it. If that's what they want to taste, they want to taste the flesh and blood of other animals, then by the amazing arrangement of material nature, they can be given a tiger's body. The other day we had a night, we showed the movie The Ramayan. There's an animated version of The Ramayan on YouTube. It's done by a company called Wow. It's for kids, but it's done very well. So we have a number of volunteers here. They work 24 hours a week for room and board. They come from Workaway, WOFA, Worldwide Opportunity for Organic Farming, and also from another exchange called Help Exchange. So we had a movie night Friday night, and in order to further allure them to the showing of the Ramayan, we promised veggie burgers. So some of the volunteers had heard about the Impossible Burger. So we went to Costco and we got some Impossible Burgers, and we cooked them up for the volunteers and fed them along with chips and carrot sticks and so on and so forth. And I noticed in the package, they're awfully red. They're awfully red. And someone told me that the Impossible Burgers are made to order for people who like to eat their meat rare. So I had a little taste of one after it was cooked, and oh my, it was like scary. It was so scary. I mean, this is more, I mean, honestly, I don't particularly care for the taste of meat. I like the idea of plant-based meats, but the similarity that they've achieved for this Impossible Burger, it's almost, the taste is more meaty than meat itself. It's like it has that, oh, anyway, I won't get into the details, but if you like to eat your meat rare, may I humbly suggest you will not be disappointed with the Impossible Burger. In fact, getting them at Costco, I think they were like $1.50 each, which is, I mean, very, very reasonably priced. And you know, the thing is, just as an aside, when you go to the stores now, Walmart and Costco and all, the meat, what do they call it? The meat cabinets, the meat freezer cabinets are very sparse now. The cupboard is bare. So many meat packing plants have been shut down because they're hotspots for coronavirus. The virus itself started from humans eating meat. And we find now that the supply, they're struggling to supply the carnivores their taste for flesh. And as an alternative, the sales of Impossible Burger and Beyond Meat are skyrocketing. And let me just tell you, if you're on the fence, if you're just wondering what it would be like, go ahead, try it. If you like the taste, you will not be disappointed. It's like so realistic that for me it's almost disgusting. But you'll like it if you're a dyed-in-the-wool meat eater. Okay, and really, if you can get the taste and even a better nutrition, because the protein you get from a plant source is higher quality protein than the protein you get from meat, then why wouldn't you go for this option? People say, well, I can't give up meat because I like the taste of meat. Honestly, it's unbelievable. Okay, so getting back to our theme here from the 5th verse of the 8th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Death is the test. Ante kale chamam eva shmaran. Again, we find that word shmaran. Mam, Krishna says to Arjuna, if ante kale means body, ante means leaving, or after this body, upon departing this body, mameva, if you think of me, Krishna says, not the impersonal or not some force field beyond Krishna, but Krishna is 18 inches from Arjuna, face to face. He says, if you think of me in my personal form, shmaran, and you have that impression, and of course you're not going to just think of Krishna at the time of death. You have to practice throughout your life. You have to chant, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Read and watch the devotional versions of the Ramayana and Mahabharata. Eat prasadam, not necessarily meat substitutes, but there's a whole world of pure vegetarian foods that are available. Associate with devotees. Chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. The sum total of living a God-centered life, of making God-centered choices, is eating this food going to honor God? Is hanging around with these people going to honor God? Is watching this DVD going to honor God? Is reading this book going to honor God? If you base your life decisions on whether they are going to honor God or not, the result is that your smaranan, your impression at the time of death, will be of the personal form of Krishna. Then mukta kalevaram. Krishna assures you that leaving this body, you will be mukta. You'll be liberated from having to take another birth in this world of birth, death, disease, and old age. Krishna will bring you back to him. Ya priyati shamadbhavan. You're going to ascend, to rise to Krishna's nature. Yati nashta ajasamsaya. There is no doubt of this. Please do not scruple. Please do not hesitate. Please do not disbelieve the words of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the source of all avatars, incarnation, who has created both the spiritual and the material world, who is our loving Father, who created us, who simply wants to gather us back to him and love him. Please do not doubt his word, but embrace it and practice it wholeheartedly. You'll not be the loser, but you'll be the gainer by millions of times over. The little translation of this verse is, and whoever at the end of his life quits his body, remembering me alone at once, bang, bang, as lightning and illumination occur simultaneously, one at once attains my eternal nature. Samsayam. Note this word, as if you weren't convinced. To this point, Krishna, the Supreme Lord, is essentially begging you, please don't doubt this. Don't doubt my capabilities of gathering you back to my loving, sheltering breast at the end of this life. We read in Chaitanya Charitamrita Adi Leela, 16th chapter, 21st verse, Prabhura Vyaha Sharpe Lakshmira Damshila Varaha Sharpe Visha Tanra Paraloka Haila. Talk about snakes. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was married by arrangement to Lakshmi Deva, who was none other than his eternal consort Lakshmi. But Lord Chaitanya traveled away preaching, and he went to Gaya for Pitru worship, and he was away for some time. So the snake of separation bit Lakshmi Devi and caused her death. And being fully absorbed in thoughts of Lord Chaitanya, in fact, the cause of her death was that she missed Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu so much that she could no longer maintain her body and separation from the Lord. So in full shmaran, in full remembrance and recollection of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as none other than Krishna, she passed from this world to the next world and went back to home, back to God. It works. It works. I remember one time, many years ago, before the digital age, Karandar was in Los Angeles, and he used to give bulletins, news flashes, interesting happenings throughout the Hare Krishna world. And we got this newsletter 1 year, 1 month. It told about a life member in South Africa, huge Indian population in South Africa. It was Janmashtami. It was the auspicious time of the birth celebration of Lord Krishna. Anything you do on that day, chanting, offering prasadam, fasting, is magnified by thousands and thousands of times over. And the most auspicious moment in Janmashtami is the midnight hour. That's the hour when Krishna descended into the prison house of Kamsa as the son of Vasudeva and Devaki. So all the celebrations, the chanting, and the abhishekam and everything, the rituals, they all culminate in the midnight hour. And generally there's a countdown, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, and the altars have been closed. And then they're dramatically open at midnight. The lights are out, the altar is illuminated, and everybody sings and celebrates. They blow conch shells, they bang gongs, and have a wonderful kirtan. Usually your best singer, your best kirtan leader is going to lead that arti. And afterwards, all the devotees are fasting, so they have a big Ekadasi feast. So there was one life member, one Indian gentleman, and he hadn't been a resident of the temple, but he'd been very helpful in any way that he could for a number of decades. He'd been a successful businessman, he had resources, fun, so he would always help out the temple, either by physically working or donated. He never said no. So the devotees were on this big stage. It was like 5,000 Indians underneath the tent in an outdoor program. And this life member, he came up onto the stage at about 11:30 at night. And he really, technically, wasn't supposed to be on the stage, just the kirtan, but you know, he'd done so much and everybody had such a soft spot for him. Nobody had the heart to say, excuse me, Mr. Agarwal, you're not supposed to be up here. They let him come. And he wandered around the stage, and as the midnight hour approached, and he was quite elderly, he was in his 80s, I should mention that. And his hands were up, and he was just, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. He was getting in the kirtan more and more, and it's getting closer, and everybody's getting more and more ecstatic in anticipation, the midnight hour. And just before the midnight hour chimed, and the gongs and the conch shells went off and the arti started, he raised his hands, and those who were closest to him could hear him over the sound of the kirtan, shouting out, looking upwards, Krishna has come for me on the back of Garuda. And he dropped dead on the stage at that moment. So whenever I think of Shmarana, thinking of Krishna at the time of leaving your body, I think of this most fortunate gentleman who left his body thinking of Krishna at the midnight hour. He wasn't a full-time missionary, he wasn't a monk, he wasn't a brahmachari, but how could you doubt that he got the highest elevation, that he achieved the shelter of the lotus feet of Krishna? And this goal, this achievement, is the perfection of the human form of life. It is the purpose of all creation. It's so important, so essential, that having achieved the human form of life, the great devotee Prahlad Maharaj says, you should begin it, the practice of Krishna consciousness, the practice of Smaran, remembering Krishna, as soon as possible. Komara, this is from the 7th canto, 6th chapter, 1st verse, wherein Prahlad Maharaj says, Komara vachara pragnam dharmam bhagavatamiha durlabham api manusha tadapi adruvam artidam. From the age of 5. At 5 years old, one should no longer postpone or delay. Most people think, oh yeah, I'll have my childhood, and then I'll raise a family, and then I'll be in retirement, and then maybe the last few moments before death I'll think of Krishna. Prahlad says, no. Start it at the age of 5 years old. It is so important. He says, although this body, this human body that we've achieved, has the same elements, earth, air, fire, water, mind, as the animals, nevertheless, it is unique amongst all the species of life in that in the human form of body, you can understand the subtleties of the material energy, the spiritual energy which rests above the material energy, and ultimately the supreme spirit serving which, thinking of which, meditating upon, we can make our life successful and go back home, back to Godhead. So this current body, although it's temporary, like the bodies of the cats and the dogs and the llamas and the parrot, it is so meaningful because in the human life, and only in the human life, can one chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, study and understand the Bhagavad Gita under the mentorship of a bona fide spiritual master in a chain of disciplic succession. And this process is so powerful that even a slight amount of sincere devotional service can give one complete perfection. Unfortunately, modern so-called civilization, not caring for the conclusions of Vedic literature, instead of cultivating sensitivity, compassion, divine love, they're so inconsiderate, so insensitive, so out of it, so cruel to the members of human society that instead of teaching their children to become nice devotees of Krishna from the age of 5, it teaches the mothers to kill their children in the womb before they even see the light of day, on the manufactured plea of curbing the increase of population. And if by chance a child makes it through and sees the light of day, they're still killed by being sent to the slaughterhouse of material education where there's no knowledge of the soul or of God or the Supreme Soul. On the other hand, those parents that want to do the best service for their children, they make sure they have access to Bhagavad Dharma education, which consists of Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Padam Sevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam. Prabhupada recommends that all schools, college and universities, and homeschooling, children and youths should be taught to hear about the Supreme Personality of Godhead, to hear the instructions of the Bhagavad Gita, and to put them into practice in their lives, thus becoming strong in devotional service, free from the fear of being degraded to animal life. Finishing up here on our Wisdom Wednesday, our last session of this week, we're going to quote you the 17th verse of the Ish Upanishad. Vaya analam amritam atidam bashmatam saradam om krato shmaran kritam shmara krato shmara kritam shmara. Notice the usage of the word shmara again, impression or remembrance, 4 times in this key verse from the Ish Upanishad. And the prayer that is rendered by this devotee, he says, let this temporary body be burned to ashes, and let the air of my life be merged with the totality of air. Now, my Lord, at the time of death, please remember all my sacrifices, and because you have been the ultimate beneficiary of my life's activities, please remember all that I have done for you. What does this tell us? That even if, due to the disturbances of death, the suffocation, the death rattle, the shutting down of seeing, hearing, smelling, all of which occurs prior to death, if because of all these disturbances, one does not shmaranam, remember Krishna, Krishna remembers the devotee. Krishna will not forget the devotional service that you've done, even if you forget Krishna at the time of death. Prabhupada says, unlike the simple animals who have no developed mind, the dying human has the potential to remember the activities of his life, like we remember dreams after having awakened in the morning. Therefore, it is possible to surcharge the mind with spirituality and to resonate with bhava, the Krishna bhava, the Krishna nature. Devotees develop this sense of love of God, this attraction, and this remembrance of the Lord by practicing devotional service to the Lord. But even if at the time of death a devotee does not remember his service to the Lord does not forget him. So powerful is devotional service. And we read yesterday about how Sisupal, he didn't serve the Lord in affection or in love. He had enmity and animosity to the Lord. He insulted the Lord in public 100 times. But he was practicing Nam Shmarna, for better or worse. The impression that he had, of course he had fear and enmity and anger, but he was Krishna Smaranam. Sisupal was Nam Shmaranam. And as a result, after having left his body, his soul arose from his body, and in the vision of everyone present there at the Rajashrama arena, it entered into the body of Krishna. And the blood which seeped from the dead body of Sisupal creeped towards the lotus feet of Krishna and took shelter there. So if Sisupal, who was in enmity and hate of Krishna and who insulted Krishna, could get to ascend to the eternal nature of Krishna through Nam Smaranam, through Krishna Smaranam, imagine if Sisupal got such a wonderful result through enmity. Imagine if we lovingly chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, and place our energies, our words, our wealth, our resources, our talents and abilities always on the altar of Krishna. Yad karosi, yad ishnosi, yad jahasi, yad tapashi, tad karusham arpanam. The conclusion is that the Lord is eternally existent in his transcendent form, which is neither gross nor subtle matter like the forms of the living beings, you and me. The Lord's body is never to be compared to the gross and subtle bodies of a living being. All such conceptions of the Lord's body are imaginary and illusory. The living being, you and I, we have our eternal form, which is conditioned only by our material contamination. If we adopt the practice of Krishna consciousness, Bhakti Yoga, and clean those material inebriates and unwanted dirty things from the heart, the result will be that our natural Krishna consciousness will awaken and arise, and at the time of leaving this body, we will not be cast again into the eternal, the 8,400,000 species of life in this material world, but we will be resurrected back to home, back to God, to live eternally with the Lord in our original transcendental bodies of knowledge, bliss, and eternity. Om Tat Sat. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So let's all go back to home, back to guided together. Terry, Bhai Bobby, Anjali, Joe, Rupa Manjari. Let's see, who else do we have here? It's not responding, it's not scrolling as I would like it to scroll. So if you're out there, I'm sorry, I'm not Mary, of course. Thank you all of those who joined us on this last session for this current week. Thank you for all your emojis. Delighted to end our Wisdom Wednesday with a bang. Please take our topics to heart, and until we meet again next time, don't forget to chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And I'll just wait till the fireworks end before we sign off on this Wednesday morning from Spanish Fort, Utah. They're still coming. Yes, 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 yes. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama. And if you come upon this broadcast later, if you're not joining us live, you can still do the same things. You can like, you can share, you can give your emojis even after, if you come upon it on our Facebook page, Caru, Utah. We have a YouTube channel also. You can still provide reciprocity interaction by which the Facebook algorithm will push us up higher. Okay, so finally, thank you, thank you, thank you. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. I've got to go now because the volunteers are making pancakes for everyone this morning from a really nice whole wheat batter that we picked up. So we chanted Hare Krishna. Now it's time to take prasadam.